Conference championship weekend, folks, and we'll cover it right here at the Voice of College Football, and we do so with our guy, Steve Helwick. We lean on him every time we get a big matchup in the group of five. Join his work on Underdog Dynasty, also Hustle Belt there on SB Nation. We're going to break down the G5 championship games coming up this weekend. Of course, we've got on Friday night Conference USA with the Mean Green of North Texas, 7-5 coming in against a favorite in Texas San Antonio, Steve.
Yes, this is going to be a pretty good matchup. And one thing about the CUSA Championship is it is not at a neutral site. And in my opinion, I think that the Alamo Dome is the best home field advantage that any team gets in the CUSA. So for the second straight year, the CUSA Championship will be at the Dome, and the Dome will be rocking. A lot of people have been going to UTSA games recently. Jeff Traylor, what he has done for that program cannot be understated. He's really brought a passion to that fan base in San Antonio, where there's no NFL team, and a lot of the football fixes on UTSA, a program that's only about a decade old. So UTSA has been rolling lately. They have the longest win streak in the country outside of the three undefeated teams, Georgia, Michigan, and TCU. UTSA has won 9 straight. Their only losses this year were to Houston, which was a multi-overtime game in week 1. And then in week 3, they lost to Texas in a game where it was really closer than the score looked. A pick 6 in the second half really pushed the Longhorns ahead for the rest of the game when UTSA had a lead at halftime. So UTSA has been competitive even in their 2 losses this year to the Cougars and Longhorns. And this team, they really had to overcome adversity last week against UTEP, overcoming a 24-0 deficit to beat the Miners for their largest comeback in school history. So it was a really impressive comeback from UTSA. And I think that's the type of adversity they needed to face going into this game against North Texas. Then North Texas, huge news on campus today. Their AD left for West Virginia. Ren Baker just took the job with the Mountaineers. So there's some news on North Texas, but the Mean Green still have Seth Luttrell, who has coached in a CUSA championship game before back in 2017. So this time it'll be a different look North Texas squad, but they're really good on offense and really bad on defense. They rank below 100th in both rushing and passing defense, so it might be a question why they're participating in championship weekend. They had a tough non-conference schedule that they were unable to get a lot of wins out of, but offensively, they're really good. They're led by a 29-year-old quarterback in Austin Ani, who used to pursue a pro baseball career, and then they have a good stable of running backs that they like to rotate between. So this should be, I'd say, an offensive-centric matchup in the Alamo Dome, similar to what we had last year between UTSA and Western Kentucky.
And so we will move it on to Saturday's games, and the MAC Championship kicks off at noon on ESPN, noon Eastern time, with the Bobcats of Ohio taking on the Rockets of Toledo, Steve.
Yes, this is an interesting matchup, and one thing going into this matchup is we don't really know who Toledo's quarterback is going to be, and we don't know much about Ohio's quarterback. Now, Ohio, today was the day that the Conference Players of the Year were named, and Ohio had the MAC MVP and MAC Offensive Player of the Year and quarterback Curtis Rourke. Unfortunately, in Ohio's penultimate regular season game, Rourke tore his ACL, which leaves C.J. Harris, who entered last week's game against Bowling Green. That was his first career start. C.J. Harris is going to start this MAC championship, and not much is known about him. So far, he's completing passes at about a 45% clip, so there could be some improvements there. But we have seen Harris really show his mobility in the run game, and I think that's one thing that Ohio's offense is going to have to lean on in this game. Now for Toledo's really rotated between quarterbacks of DeQuan Finn and Tucker Gleason, depending on Finn's health status. Finn's been nicked up through injuries all year, and it was clear that he really wasn't at his best last week from a health perspective in Toledo's loss to Western Michigan. So they've had a lot of Tucker Gleason recently, and Toledo hasn't seen the results that they've wanted ever since clinching the MAC championship game a few weeks ago. The Rockets ride a 2-game losing streak, both games where they were pretty significantly favored against Bowling Green and Western Michigan. They lost both of those games heading into this MAC championship. So they're kind of limping in while Ohio rides a 7-game win streak. And the Bobcats have been really phenomenal. Their only loss in conference play this year was an overtime game to Kent State. And then their other 2 losses were non-conference games to Penn State and Iowa State. So Ohio has done a really good job in Tim Albin's second year at the helm in just restocking and reloading that program. One thing about Ohio is they're always in it. They always seem like a good team. They had 12 consecutive seasons of bowl eligibility from 2009 to 2020. But Ohio has not won a MAC championship since 1968. That's the longest span in the conference. Since the MAC championship game was born in 1997, the Bobcats are 0-4 in MAC title games, and they have yet to be favored in one. And right now, Toledo is the slight favorite, I believe, which is mainly due to Curtis Rourke's injury and the uncertainty that Ohio has at the quarterback position. And Toledo does present a lot of good players in its front seven. Pass rusher Jamal Hines. You have Deontay Johnson, not to be confused with former Toledo receiver Deontay Johnson. This is the linebacker who's one of the best tacklers in the conference, an Ohio State transfer in Dallas Gant. And then on the back end, Maxon Hook at the safety position, Nate Bauer. All MAC teams were named today. 7 of their 11 defensive starters are all MAC players. So Toledo does have a lot of firepower on the defensive end, and that's what they bring into this matchup.
Rourke, of course, as Steve mentioned, sorely missed, 25 touchdowns, 4 picks. And much of that time with the Bobcats contending in the MAC, of course, under the direction of Frank Solich, but no championships since going all the way back to 68. Wow. So MAC championship, Rockets and Bobcats get it together there on ESPN. A little bit later in the day, we got Steve Helwick on the line from Hustle Belt and from Underdog Dynasty. A little bit later in the day, we've got a matchup with Coastal Carolina. Of course, their prowess in the Sun Belt is pretty well documented in recent years. Got off to a really hot start, taken a few hits in the last few weeks. Troy, I believe the last time they lost was that Hail Mary against App State. Steve, we got the Sun Belt, Coastal Carolina and Troy.
Yeah, and the Troy head coach, their first-year head coach, John Summerall, was saying this year that Hail Mary really made them stronger, and he doesn't know if they would be the same team they are today if it weren't for that play. So Troy is on a roll right now. I think they've won 9 straight games, and the Trojans are a team that's really built on their defense. They're not a team that's going to light up the scoreboard and get you 30, 40 points. I know they did that against some of the lesser competition, like Arkansas State last week. They posted 48. But the majority of their games this year, they've won in low-scoring fashion. They beat Army 10-9. They beat South Alabama 10-6. They beat Marshall 16-7. They beat Texas State 17-14. They're a team that really attacks with an aggressive defense, and that's the signature of Troy football right now, where they don't really need a great offensive output to win just because their defense has been so dominant. And Carlton Marshall, who I believe is the FBS active leader in tackles, he's had 110 plus tackles in 4 consecutive seasons. He's had several seasons with double-digit tackles for loss. He is an incredible linebacker that's leading this defense. He's been there since 2018 in a major starting role, and he's going to be the guy that you're going to want to watch to carry this Troy defense on Saturday against Coastal Carolina. Now, Coastal Carolina, they're an interesting team. They're 9-2. They went 6-2 in the Sun Belt this year, and they have a negative differential in conference play because both of Coastal Carolina's losses this year in conference play, they got absolutely eviscerated. One by a bad Old Dominion team on homecoming at the Surf Turf in Myrtle Beach. And the other one was last Saturday to James Madison. They lost 47-7 to the newest FBS team. So Coastal Carolina didn't actually win their division. James Madison did, but James Madison is bowl ineligible this year due to the transition phase to the FBS. So Coastal Carolina is going to be in this football game. Now, Coastal Carolina, you might know over the few years that Grayson McCall has been their star quarterback. He's a great option runner. He is an incredibly accurate quarterback, but McCall has been out the last few games, and that has shown in Coastal Carolina's struggles. So it looks like they're going to go to either Jared Guest or Bryce Carpenter for this game, and Coastal Carolina's offense has really looked absent without McCall in the lineup. So I think that's going to be a huge difficulty, huge uphill battle for this Coastal team to climb because everything starts with McCall's brilliance on offense. The playmakers like the receiver Sam Pinckney and Jared Brown, they need McCall to thrive. And then the running game, I said it's very option-based. It also needs McCall to thrive. So if I would give Coastal Carolina one advantage in this matchup, I would say that the Chanticleers have a really good pass rush while Troy's offensive line has struggled at times. So if Josiah Stewart returns to the lineup this week, he's a tremendous true sophomore pass rusher. That's one name I would watch just to try to spark Coastal's defense over a Troy team that doesn't really have the best offensive output on a weekly basis.
Steve, of course, the matchup that is going to gain the most national attention, we've got a ranked matchup in the American Conference Championship game with UCF taking on Tulane. Tulane, of course, with an early win, grabbed attention against Kansas State. Had a nice win, of course, at Cincinnati last weekend. So your thoughts about this Titanic matchup?
Well, it's a rematch in the same city that we saw earlier in November, where Tulane and UCF played in the Big Easy, and UCF got a 38-31 win. And I'm not even sure if that game was as close as the box score suggests. It seemed like UCF really gashed Tulane on the ground that game. And entering that matchup, Tulane actually had a really good run defense, and it's fallen apart since then, as UCF just posted, I think, like well over 200 yards by halftime. And the majority of that rushing attack was done by John Rice Plumlee, UCF's quarterback. Now, Plumlee was on a tear against South Florida last week, and UCF had a 28-0 lead. But Plumlee had some hamstring issues, and Gus Malzahn pulled him for the remainder of the contest. Then UCF's offense started to suffer a little bit. So Plumlee's hamstring, something to watch in this game. I'm guessing it was more precautionary, and that's why they pulled him from that South Florida game, thinking that they were going to beat a 1-10 team a lot easier than they actually did, with backup Mikey Keene in the lineup. So Plumlee is going to be the key factor in this game, because his dynamic running ability was just uncontainable by Tulane in the last matchup. He had 176 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, got big gain after big gain on a lot of option plays. Now, UCF does have some running backs, R.J. Harvey and Isaiah Bowser. Harvey's more of the speed guy. Bowser's more of the classic bruiser running back that they like to trot out. So those are the guys that they're going to try to use to spark that run game against the Green Wave. Now, Tulane does have a pretty good run game of its own. Today, Tyjae Spears, its running back, was named as the AAC Offensive Player of the Year. Tyjae Spears really helped Tulane secure the hosting duties of this game last week when he had 186 yards against Cincinnati. So Tulane's more of a running-based offense too, and that's where they're going to try to do their damage. Now, UCF's defense at the beginning of the year, they were pretty good at limiting teams in all facets of the game. It wasn't until late October when they allowed their first opponent to get more than 20 points this season, when they lost to East Carolina. But lately, the wheels have fallen off a little bit on UCF's defense, and we saw that last week in the second half against South Florida, when South Florida scored 39 points on the Knights, including 32 in the second half. So we need to see UCF really improve their defense if the Knights want to win this game for the second time this season. Tulane, they have a pretty good defense overall, really good linebacking core, and a lot of talent in the safety positions with Larry Brooks and Macon Clark. And those safeties and the linebackers, I think, really helped limit Cincinnati's passing game last week. They only fared 10 of 26 and had an interception. So I think that Tulane and the passing defense is going to be another key area to watch in this game, because you can keep UCF a little one-dimensional at times with the running game if their passing attack isn't working.
We've got Steve Helwick here. Check out his work at SB Nation. It's on hustlebelt.com and also on Underdog Dynasty, breaking down the group of 5, 4 games on Saturday after the one between Texas San Antonio and North Texas on Friday night. And a game that if anybody has any insight into college football, it's going to respect what the Mountain West delivers year after year, in another Titanic matchup here when we're talking about programs that deliver just about every year. Fresno State, Boise State took their hits out of conference, but have delivered obviously strong, especially the Broncos here in the last 10 or 12 weeks. So your thoughts about Boise State, Fresno State?
It's funny because this is the matchup we all thought we were getting preseason, but it took quite the journey to get there. Fresno State started 1-4 with a loss to UConn in there. They looked really bad. And Boise State started 2-2. They had a really bad loss to UTEP. So these teams, they really struggled in non-conference play. And it looked like Boise State was just going to go off the rails when their starting quarterback, Hank Bachmeier, entered the transfer portal midseason. And things just weren't looking good on the Broncos campus. But Boise State is 9-3. They went 8-0 in the Mountain West. Yes, I do think that this was one of the weakest, if not the weakest, Mountain West I've ever seen. And you can measure that by the amount of times their teams lost to FCS opponents this year. Colorado State, Utah State, Nevada. and a lot of those were double-digit losses. So the Mountain West really wasn't at its best this year, but I thought Boise State did a good job of taking advantage late down the season. And the Broncos have a pretty good defense that ranks 9th in the country in opponent points per game. Guy that I would watch here is J.L. Skinner. He's their do-everything safety. He has 4 interceptions this year and is their second leading tackler. And Skinner's just a hard hitter. He's 6'4", huge safety. And he just delivers all over the field. He's going to be someone that if you happen not to watch this game for some reason, you're going to catch J.L. Skinner for years to come on Sundays because he has that much talent in him. Now, Boise State's offense doesn't really carry the same weight its defense does. They don't really light up teams with 300 yards through the air with their new quarterback, Taylon Green. But what they can do is they can just run all over opponents. Their quarterback, Taylon Green, is part of that, but they also have George Halani, their 1,000-yard running back, who has done a really good job at elevating the run game this year. And that's where Boise State's main point of attack will be against Fresno State on Saturday. For Fresno State, you might recall Jake Haener last year being one of the best quarterbacks in the country. I feel like this has been a really quiet year for Jake Haener, and I think that's just because he got hurt and missed a chunk of the season, that chunk of the season where Fresno State was losing ball games. If you just remember week 2, Jake Haener had this team one play away from beating Oregon State after a 360-yard passing game. Oregon State scored on the final play of the game. And now look at the Beavers. They're number 15 in the country. So that just shows the potential of this team when Jake Haener is in the lineup. Haener returned on October 29th, and since then, Fresno State is 5-0. So they're on a 7-game win streak right now. And Haener, in that 5-game stretch, he's had 4 passing performances over 300 yards, many multi-touchdown games, and he has not thrown an interception since October. So Jake Haener is really the Fresno State football team. His injury was the difference between this team losing to UConn or beating UConn, and also possibly the difference of this team losing to Boise State by 20 points back in October. Boise already beat Fresno 40-20 earlier this year, and Jake Haener was absent in that game. Fresno State couldn't get anything going on offense, and Boise State did have a quality rushing game in that win. So I think this is a completely different matchup when you look at Haener's availability here. Yes, this game is at Albertson Stadium in Boise State, but I do like the Bulldogs just because of what their offense has been under Haener as of lately. Now, Fresno State doesn't bring the best defense into this contest. If they win a lot of times, they can win in more of a shootout form. But Fresno State, they have had their good performances this year on the defensive end. But I think this is an interesting matchup and maybe the closest conference championship game this weekend in terms of difficulty to predict.
Steve, you mentioned the FCS slip-ups for the Mountain West, and then on the other end of the spectrum, obviously, we have witnessed the Mountain West competing in a strong way against the Power 5 in the past, most notably against the Pac-12 with all the matchups scheduled there, but not so much this year. So, yeah, maybe a down year in the Mountain West, but still, when these two teams get together at the top of this league, that's a must-see football right there. Steve, we appreciate you stopping by. We want everyone to check out Steve's work on Hustle Belt and on Underdog Dynasty on SB Nation. What's your schedule look like this weekend, Steve?
Going to New Orleans for the AAC title game. I think that'll be a fun one. This is the last time the AAC will ever have UCF. So any championship game UCF, Cincinnati, Houston will play in now will be in Arlington, Texas, where that TCU Kansas State game is being held. Another good game to look forward to this weekend. So I'm ready for this conference championship weekend. It should be a pretty exciting one with good matchups all across the board, especially have my eye on that Pac-12 one, which has a playoff spot at stake after the rankings were revealed yesterday.
Absolutely. Steve, we thank you so much for the insight and the information. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.